Hello and welcome to Monologue, the reflexive interview. And in today's edition, I'm delighted to be able to welcome the enigmatic philosopher John Pemberton. And I understand this today is his very first interview as a philosopher. So our task this morning is going to be to cast some spotlight on the intrigue which is this man. John, thanks so much for inviting me along. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to talking to you today. So John, to kick off, perhaps you'd just tell me a little bit about what you're up to at the moment. My main theme at the moment, I've been working on change for a long time, as you know, and recently I've shifted to talking about changing. And I'm making the argument, John, that the world is changing, in the sense that the objects in the world are changing, so that when you are cycling along on your bicycle, for instance, you are moving forward. And a lot of the people I speak to are rather surprised that there's a need to argue for such things. But of course, as you know, contemporary metaphysics rejects this notion of changing. The at account of motion, Mosaic ontology, rejects the idea that we are actually moving, that motion is merely, it takes motion to be a series of states. So how do I argue for changing? Well, in fact, I go back to Aristotle as a starting point. Aristotle believes the world is changing, and he makes the case, or he believes it's changing on the basis that things exist through time as ontologically prior to their temporal parts. Now, it's this view that Aristotle thinks that objects are prior to their temporal parts I call lasting, because it hasn't been widely articulated in the literature or in the discussion. But I think it's widely acknowledged amongst Aristotelians that this is his position, and I think it's an important one to bring into the wider debate. So that's what I'm attempting to do. We have changing based on this ontology of change, this lasting, the existing through time of the objects. So that's my kind of central thrust of the current work. Excellent, thanks, John. And that brings us to your visit here to Bonn today. And I understand from Mr. Fisher that you are a member of his Change and Changemakers network. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your role in that network. Yeah, for me, the network is so fantastic because, as I say, I'm working on change. And so to have a network of people working on change and change making is, I mean, just absolutely perfect for me, in line with my the thrust of my work. I arranged a conference last year in conjunction with Florian Fischer and Anna Marmodoro, which we held online, Change and Change Makers in Ancient Philosophy. And I think we were delighted that we got a really good response to that. And we had 16 contributions over a 2-day period on an online conference. It went very well. We really, I think, learned a lot. We, as a result, published a special issue of the proceedings of that. So that's one of the things I've contributed to the network, and really my participation in the other meetings is my other main contribution, and what a pleasure it is. Excellent, thank you, John. So perhaps you could tell us, in your experience, what do you feel has been the big breakthrough, the moment where you have realized something new? I think I would cite in that regard the work that I've done on Aristotle and his account of change. I was a philosopher of science for a number of years, working with Cartwright, and it was only belatedly that I've come to metaphysics. And I came to metaphysics in order to answer some questions around the nature of mechanisms. What are mechanisms, and how do they change? And I was lucky enough that to meet Anna Marmodoro, who has influenced me very considerably on this with Aristotelian ideas. I think Aristotle's account of change is the right account of change, essentially, for our world. He believes that change is brought about by objects acting through time. Objects acting through time bring about changing through time. It avoids the need to think that we have diachronic bringing about of change, that something at one stage brings about something at a later stage. On the Aristotelian account, objects existing through time bring about changing through time, so they can bring about a later stage, a change, right? But change is always brought about as changing through time. And so I guess for me that is exciting because firstly it's an agreed Aristotelian position amongst Aristotelians, but it's not really been articulated in a way that has brought it into the contemporary debate. And so that's my excitement really, is to bring that into the contemporary debate and to make progress on that. Okay, I see, thank you. So John, just going back then, there's been somewhat of an enigma, an intrigue, I guess, around what it is that has brought you into philosophy, and you clearly haven't followed a very orthodox path. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the background to how you got to be where you are today. Aha, well, that of course is a rather longer story than for most people, I'm sure, sitting in this chair. So I've obviously had an unorthodox path to philosophy, as I think you know, John. I was working in the city in commercial life way back in the day, and I was an actuary rubbing shoulders with economists. The economists always seemed to have these weird ideas which disagreed with my own and made I couldn't make sense of. So I spent time trying to understand why people thought that this economics stuff was science. And I became interested in the foundations of economics and concerned about the basis of those foundations. And so that was really my first push towards taking methodology, philosophy seriously. So I looked at the methodology of economics, the philosophy of economics, and then on to the philosophy of science, trying to understand that. I started writing back when I was still working very much in the city. And I had the good fortune to be introduced to Nancy Cartwright in the early 1990s. She was extremely generous in engaging with me as a philosopher. She was clearly a world-class philosopher already, coming from a physics background, and probably the only philosopher in the world at that stage, at least of that level of caliber, who was interested in studying economics. So it was enormously good fortune for me. So I became friends with Nancy. She helped me publish my first paper from these early ramblings which I'd written. And she included me in her group at the LSE, which was a genuine collaboration of economists and philosophers for that period. It's a very exciting period of development. And we've been friends and worked together ever since on the philosophy of science, on the nature of causation, on powers, on mechanisms, on the nature of laws. And as you know, we've published these 3 papers together now. That's what brought me in eventually. And as I say, more recently, my concern has been to answer these questions, which I think are good questions about, well, it's all very well talking about mechanisms, but what are mechanisms? What are the parts of mechanisms? When you talk about change in mechanisms, what is that? And so that is what's led me on to my current work from those early beginnings. Okay, I see. Well, that's really fascinating. So tell me, just going forward then from here, what are your plans for research, for taking forward this work that you're doing? In 2018, I really got to a point where I felt I needed to write a book-length manuscript. I was finding it very difficult to express my ideas in paper-length form, and I started writing that manuscript. And a couple of years ago, 2019, Anna Marmodoro suggested that it would be a good idea to submit that as a PhD thesis up at Durham. So we've agreed on that path and are going down it. And so Anna is now my supervisor up at Durham. We've worked together superbly. She has been excellent in terms of one of those rare people that can read my work and then critique it from its own perspective rather than from someone else's perspective. And that's been just tremendous. And so I feel I've made a lot of progress in terms of developing the ideas. I've 12 months, I think, now to complete the book-length manuscript, the thesis manuscript in its early version. That is my next immediate task. That won't constitute the book will need to include further work on teleology and free will. And I'm hoping to complete that within a year or so after that. So I have this kind of program stretching out of writing. And surrounding that, I guess I've come from an unorthodox position in terms of being outside of the industry, outside of academia, and coming in. And I guess I'm looking to engage more consistently, more closely with the academic community. I've been arranging various conferences with Anna. I'm going to be around for a while yet. Well, John, thank you so much for those really helpful insights into who you are. That has been wonderful for today. And we'll look forward to seeing you back in Bonn before too long, and perhaps we can catch up on your progress then. John, that's been wonderful to speak to you, and thank you so much again for inviting me along. And absolutely, I hope to see you in Bonn again before very long. Thanks. Okay, well, that wraps up this edition of Monologue, and I hope you've enjoyed this fascinating interview with John Pemberton. And we will be with you back before too long for our next exciting edition. Thank you.